Oh, what's up everybody? I'm Matt Gary, and on this episode of Coding with the Force, I'm going to show you how to do custom authentications for integrations with external systems in Apex. Alright guys, so before we get started real quick, make sure to go over to the community tab of this YouTube channel so that you can vote on next week's video. If you didn't know, I give you guys the power to vote and decide on which videos I make for the upcoming week. So go ahead, go over there, check it out, vote, and hopefully I make the video that you want. And, hopefully it turns out good and you like it. I'm going to try my best anyway. Alright, so, the first thing I do in all these videos is explain why you would ever want to create custom authentication in your integrations. If you didn't know, Salesforce has this wonderful, wonderful thing called named credentials. And in many, many instances, I would say probably 60% at least of the integrations that you're going to do, you can do with named credentials. And named credentials make this a whole lot easier. In fact, I intentionally built the, that's not the right one. I intentionally built the exact same code that I did in a different video where I showed how to use named credentials for this particular demonstration. And as you can see, maybe, this code, the post example code where I use a named credential, is only about 32 total lines, whereas this one that I'm about to show you today that does the same thing but with custom authentication is a little over double that. So we're at about 71 lines over here. And yeah, so you should only do custom authentications and not use named credentials when you absolutely need to. A lot of people think that there's no way to actually use named credentials for them, but in all likelihood, so when you set up a named credential, you typically also set up an auth provider. In all likelihood, a great number of your integrations are actually going to use this OpenID Connect protocol. So just make sure, before you do this, make 110% sure that you can't use a named credential. Because as you can see, as I just showed you, you save an enormous amount of code, and trust me, quite a bit of time too. So, when do you normally have to use custom authentication in integrations? Normally when it's an internal database for the company that you work for. So for instance, you're working at a company, they have an internal database that houses like customer data or something, and they want you to either send, customer data from Salesforce to that internal database, or they want you to pull customer information from that database and bring it into Salesforce. A lot of times you'll find that those, custom built in-house solutions can't be done with named credentials. And that's where you get into these custom authentications for integrations. The example that I'm going to show you today is just one example of custom authentications, but they almost all follow the same idea that I'm going to show you today, which is you call out to an endpoint to authorize yourself. That endpoint in turn sends you some kind of access token, and then you use that access token to grab data from the server or the records in your objects, potentially, right? So now that we kind of know, why and when you would create a custom authentication, a custom authentication in your actual Apex code, let's go over the tools that would be very beneficial for you to use to make this a lot easier. The biggest one is, without a doubt, PostMan or something like PostMan. This is going to let you test your integrations a lot easier. It also allows you to do a lot of automation. So, I don't have the automation set up, but you could set up chained callouts, so you could have an authorization, and that authorization pass something to, a Git, a post, or a Git, or whatever. And it's just extremely powerful. And the reason that it's useful to use Postman is because it's often a lot easier to kind of like proof out that your integration is going to work and that you understand how the components all mesh together in Postman than it is if you went and you wrote it in Apex and did it that way first. So my suggestion to you is take the time, figure out Postman, use it to test your integrations, and then write your integrations only once you get it working in Postman. I didn't quite understand this myself, but until I started using it, but trust me, it's well worth the effort. And as you can see here, it's pretty easy, right? I just put in my URL here. I put in the different parameters for my URL, and if I click send here, it's going to actually do the call out to my Salesforce endpoint. So the integration I'm doing today is from one Salesforce org to another to create an account. You can actually use a named credential for Salesforce to Salesforce integrations, but again, I'm just doing this so I can kind of show you the compare and contrast here. Anyway, so this is actually doing a call out to that org and getting the access token. And then you see down here in the results, I get this access token, and I grab this access token, right? Go over here to my post request to this REST resource that I've created in the other org to integrate with, and drop it into my authorization here. Boom. Send it. And then that is going to create an account and return the ID of the account to me, which is pretty cool, right? So now that we've kind of gone over the tools here, I know I haven't gone into great detail. If you want more information on like the URLs and stuff for post callouts and Salesforce itself or whatever, and even more information about Postman and how it works, I have another tutorial video that goes over that in a little bit greater detail, and I'll link it up above and you can click it and check it out. But I don't want to get too in depth here because this is not exactly what we're covering in this video. But I want to point it out because it's very important that you use that. It makes your life a lot easier. The next thing that you're gonna want to do is for these custom authentications for your integrations. Typically, I always make a custom metadata type to manage my integrations. So the reason that I create a custom metadata type is because the credentials for your integrations often will change. You'll have a new client ID or secret or refresh token or whatever that might be. So you don't really want to put that in the code, or you're going to have to update your code and deploy it more than you want to deal with. So I'd put it in custom metadata. And the reason that I pick custom metadata over custom settings is because when you refresh an org, so you refresh your developer orgs or all of your different sandboxes, this gets brought over as metadata. So you don't have to reload it in like you would for a custom setting every single time you refresh the sandbox. Makes your life a lot easier. So I go on ahead and store all of my authentication related things in this custom metadata type, and that way I can just kind of reference this custom metadata in the code, and whenever I need to change a client ID or a client secret or whatever else, I can just come right in here, manage my record, and update all of this information in here. Super easy. Makes your life a lot easier. The last thing that you will need to set up is what's called a remote site setting. So basically that's just like whitelist sites that you're, it allows you to connect in your Apex code to these other sites, right? whatever you're integrating with, you're going to have, if you're not using a named credential and you're doing this custom, you're going to have to create a new remote site, put in the URL of your site. So in my case, I'm just integrating with my Salesforce instance. So I put in the URL of my Salesforce instance, and I'm integrating with it basically, or so that I can call out to it rather. If you don't have this remote site setting, you'll get an error in your code that literally just tells you to go create a remote site setting for this URL. So if you start getting that weird remote site setting error in your code when you're doing this, just know you just have to come here and set up, put this URL in, you'll be good to go. All right, we've covered the setup aspect of things. We've covered Postman. We covered why you would ever set up custom integrations. Let's see a code example of doing this integration. So in here, I've set up a simple example of a call out that uses custom authentication basically. So basically what we have here is a method that's going to grab that custom metadata that we just talked about. So we've got this list of custom metadata that we query for that custom metadata that we just set up, and we return the custom metadata record that we set up. There are better ways to do this, but this is just a simple example. And once we get that custom metadata with all of our kind of authentication stuff in it, we're going to want to then get that access token from whatever that endpoint is, right? So we're going to call out to our endpoint to grab our access token. So as you can see here, I've got this method that's called get SF access token, and I'm passing it my custom metadata connection information. And I am just setting the method for that. So pretty much everywhere that you're going to, do authentications with, it's going to be a post method. So you're calling out to this place. The method in which you're going to connect to it is going to be a post method. Then you create your endpoint. In the case of Salesforce, I have to generate this URL. So I have my auth URL that is in my connection data. This might seem a little confusing if you've not done this a bunch of times. But if we go back a little bit, maybe, I have this field in my custom metadata called auth URL, which is basically just the base URL of wherever you are authenticating to. So for me, this is Salesforce. For you, this is some other URL for whatever, platform you're integrating with. And then I am generating the rest of the URL from the connection data. So as you can also see, right, in that custom metadata, I've got my client secret, client ID, username, password, security token, grant type, content type, all those kind of things. It's all stored in that custom metadata for me to reference. So when I get back over here, whoa, I don't know where that code came from. When I get back over here, I've got this authentication where I'm building the URL, right? So I'm adding the grant type, the client secret, the client ID, the username, the password, the security token. In the case of Salesforce, you pass this stuff in the URL endpoint for some reason. In a lot of cases, you'll actually set this like grant type, client secret, client ID as headers, right? And if you had to set it as a header instead of in the URL like Salesforce requests it be sent, it would be something like auth request dot set header, and then you'd have grant type, and it would be connection data dot grant type, right? So in a lot of cases, you'll find that you have to set the headers to grab this data or to authenticate rather than building the URL parameters, which is how it's done in Salesforce. Just so you know, you're either going to see it be set in a header, or you're going to have to pass this information through a header, or you're going to have to pass it through URL parameters, one way or the other. Doesn't really matter. It's not, it just differs based on what you're integrating with. Okay, so we've generated the URL, which is the endpoint, right, that we care to get our, our access token from. Then we're going to set our content type header. So we've got that stored in our connection data as well. So this is, again, this is in the that custom metadata type that I set up. There's a content type, and I just reference it from here. And then I create a new HTTP object and an HTTP response object and send out this authorization request. Okay, so I've set up this HTTP authorization request, and now I'm actually, like, this call out, or this line right here is me actually submitting that to the other server and saying, hey, here's all the information you need. Please authenticate me and give me the information that I want, right? This is the actual act of the call out. And then the last thing we do is we parse that information that we return. So this returns, as we saw in PostMan, this returns this JSON object down here at the bottom, right? So we need a way to grab that JSON object and parse it. So what I've done is created this, what I refer to as a wrapper class. I have a whole tutorial going over wrapper classes, so if you're not familiar with it, I'm going to pop up a link and you can check out what they are. They're very useful, especially with integration. So I've got this wrapper class called SF Auth, or Salesforce Authentication, and I'm using it to parse the response body that I get from, this actual call out that I'm doing right here. So this response.get body, that literally equates to this down here that we got, when we did this Postman call out, right? And then we're going to return this authorization body back up here, and then we're going to use that authentication information that we got from our call out to authenticate ourselves to actually create the account in the Salesforce instance, right? So we've now got all the authorization junk that we need. Let's go on ahead and call out to the other Salesforce instance, authenticate, and create that account. So down here, we're doing just that. You can see it's very similar to what we have up here for the actual authentication request. We've got this HTTP data request that, is posting to a REST resource in the other org. And it's, we're setting an endpoint that is this final string here, which is the URL to that endpoint. And then we're just setting the header. So what you'll see is in named credentials, you don't have to set this authorization header, but when you're not using named credentials, you definitely do. So we're setting the authorization, or basically passing in the header of our request to the other org, our authorization. So we've got our token type, which is bearer. As you can again see down here, token type is equal to bearer. And then we're going to ask it for the access token, which is the actual access token for the user, or, for our call out rather. So we've got the token type and the access token. We're setting the content type again, this time to the JSON content type, which I just have declared up here at the top as application JSON. And we are basically creating an account and serializing it in the way that the other org wants that data. So basically we're setting the body of our request to create another account. And I go over all of this in yet another tutorial called my, Apex post integration tutorial. I'll link that too. So I go over this whole process here in a lot greater detail in that. And then again, we're making an HTTP request, or sorry, we're calling out to the other org with this line here and getting a return response. And in that return response, we get an account ID. And I just return the account ID to verify that we actually made a account in the org. Cool. So let's run this just to see if it works. So this is the name of our class is custom authentication. I've got this Apex Anonymous script up here, and we will run it, see if we get an ID returned to us from this method, and hopefully we do. So let's run it. Whoa, what did I do here? Unexpected token account ID on line 4. Did I break something? Okay. I guess I didn't. Anyway, that was weird. Okay, cool. So it seems to have run, and it looks like somewhere down here we probably got an ID. Yep. So I got my debug statement here, said return account ID is this. We got an account ID, and we can check out that in the other, in this org, we've got an account created. Looks like we do, which is cool. So, everywhere that you're authenticating to in custom authentications is going to be a little bit different. A lot of places will have you like pass the time in UTC to them or in current milliseconds, or they're going to have you do different things for their authentication methods. They're not all going to be exactly what I'm showing you right here, right? But the overall concept is the same. You call out, it gives you some kind of access token. You grab that access token and you use it to actually do, whatever it is you want to do, whether that's create new data in the other org, or other external database, or retrieve data from the other external database. The method is always the same, for the most part, just small variations of it. But just to further reiterate, as you can see, this is, 70-ish lines of code. And this is quite literally, no joke, doing the exact same thing, but using a named credential. And it's only using 32 lines of code. That's huge, right? That's 40 lines of code that you cut out by learning how to use named credentials. And it's quite powerful, right? And it's why I push it in all of my videos. Learn how to use named credentials. They make your life easier. They're really great. All that kind of stuff. But you will occasionally need to do these, and so it is useful to learn how to do them. So key takeaways here. Make sure you try to use named credentials when you can. Look to make sure that you can't use OpenID Connect as your auth provider before you go into custom authentications. If you do have to do a custom authentication, remember to set up your remote site. Always use custom metadata to store your authentication credentials. it makes your life a lot easier in the long run, for sure. And then the key aspects of this are always the same. You're going to call out somewhere to authenticate. It's going to return to you an access token. And then with that access token, you're going to be able to either pull data or post data to that external database, wherever it might be. So I'll have all of this code up on my GitHub repo too, so you can take a look at it and check it out. And yeah, hopefully this was helpful. It's kind of an abstract concept because nothing is ever 100% the same as far as custom authentications, but hopefully this helps you kind of wrap your mind around the whole situation anyway. All right, guys. I think that's probably it for this video. If you have any questions, definitely leave them in the comments. Make sure to subscribe if you want more of this wonderful Salesforce development stuff. And if you made it this far, thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you guys next time.